Chase is having a romantic dinner date with his girlfriend Nicole and admits that they can easily fall in love with each other. He mentions that Preston, his best friend, and Nicole's husband, has been gone for over a year. The camera crew adjusts the angle of the scene being shot between Chase and Nicole. As soon as the scene is over, the crew surrounds both actors for their touch-ups and some notes from the assistant director. Maggie Coleman notices a prop being reused, and her boss Alice makes it very clear that no props from their sets should be thrown out or wasted. Alice has to leave to attend an untimely network meeting and commands Maggie to join her. This is part of her training to take over the channel one day, so she delegates her authority to others and accompanies Alice. They try to guess what the meeting is about, and Alice suspects that their boss Gregory is planning to make more budget cuts. Maggie isn't looking forward to that, because if there are any more budget cuts at this point, the actors would have to start wearing their own clothes. At the meeting, Gregory breaks the news that their show has low ratings, which is why the channel is considering canceling it. Alice wants more time because this show has been on air for 40 years, and they have a new interesting storyline coming up. Gregory argues that family drama won't be enough to save this show. He shows Alice and Maggie what he believes can save their show. He strongly believes that they need to bring Darren Mitchell back to the cast of the show in his role as a detective. Alice points out that Darren left the show over a year ago, which is when she's told that he still gets more fan mail than anyone else. Alice argues that they ended his character because he went to New York to do a Broadway play. Maggie also agrees with her in the fact that he won't be interested in returning to the show. Gregory informs them that Darren is back in LA after his play flopped, so they might have a chance with him. Since Alice was the one to give him his first break, she must have some leverage too, so she promises to do whatever it takes to save the show. Later on, when it's just the two of them, Alice reasons to Maggie about how Gregory might be right in believing that Darren is the only hope for their show. Maggie contests it and starts to pitch some ideas through which they can take the show in a different direction. When Alice disapproves, she suggests casting another actor for Darren's role. Alice rejects all this and makes it very clear that she'll have to figure out a way to work with him again, no matter how awkward it is. Considering the fact that they used to date, on Alice's insistence, Maggie shares that Darren asked for her opinion on his play. She didn't want to hurt his feelings, but talking to someone on the crew revealed what Maggie actually thought. This led him to believe that she wasn't being honest with him, and the whole thing went out of control from there. Regardless of all that, Alice teaches her to woman up and enlists her with the task of bringing Darren back. Maggie goes to Darren's house, where his dog Wiley immediately runs up to her. Darren, who is also in the garden, notices Maggie and doesn't give much of a positive reaction to her sudden arrival. She continues her efforts to make conversation with him until she gets to the point about the offer she has to make for him. He reminds her that his agent, Zach, is the one who handles all offers, so she should go to him instead, but she goes ahead with the proposal anyway. He thinks she's joking at first, but declines even though he liked playing the role of Detective Preston. She goes on that the network is willing to give him a raise and favorable terms for working, but he still says no. She ignores his refusal by following the cardinal rule of soap operas that says nothing is ever written in stone. He makes it clear that he's an exception to this rule, which grows her frustration. The topic of his failed play comes up, and he calls her out for not warning him about the bad writing of the play, especially when he asked for her input. She argues that he had his heart set on going to Broadway and wouldn't have changed his mind for anyone. She proposes to him many terms, but he remains adamant on turning down all her offers. When she's walking out in defeat, he throws her a tomato for her to catch as he's been growing plants in his garden lately. That evening, Maggie recalls her humiliating interaction with Alice, who is starting to make herself acquainted with the idea that their show might not last forever after all. However, she still wants it to go on for 40 more years so that Maggie can replace her now that she's approaching the end of her career. Maggie isn't upset that she's losing a major opportunity, but what makes her sad is that all the people on their crew will lose their jobs and they'll no longer see each other every day. Darren is at a meeting with Zach, who questions him about why he's avoiding reading scripts for the offers made to him. Darren responds that he needs some more time and all his efforts have been focused on gardening lately. Zach tries to make him understand that it was the play that was bad, not him. He assures Darren that the play was a small setback and it's time for him to resume acting again or else people will forget him. This causes Darren to bring up Maggie's offer, and Zach sees this as the perfect solution to get him out of his rough patch. The show is Darren's comfort zone, and he's a star there, so Zach insists that he should at least try it out for a few weeks. When Darren returns from his lunch with Zach, he finds Maggie at his house again. He invites her in this time, and she resorts to using a guilt trip to convince him. She mentions Alice, who gave him his big break and devoted 40 years of her life to this show. He owes it to her, especially since the ratings have been dipping since he left the show. He's also aware of his fans' request for him to come back, and this would make them incredibly happy. But he also has to think of his own happiness, which causes Maggie to point out that he wasn't unhappy when he was on the show. She also talks about their beloved crew members and his co-stars who will all be unemployed when the network pulls the plug on the show. These tactics seem to be working on Darren, but he is still upset by the harsh words they exchanged when he was leaving the show. Maggie admits that she said those words because her feelings were hurt due to him breaking up with her. She promises him that he's a great actor and is still willing to offer him script approval. He negotiates for his long-term contract to be altered to make it only applicable for 4 weeks. Maggie finds this unbelievable because 4 weeks isn't enough time for her to bring him back from the grave, but he leaves it up to her to figure it out. Alice is optimistic about this news and motivates Maggie to write herself out of a tough situation like this. When Darren shows up to the set, he's pleasantly surprised by his nice parking spot and dressing room. Zach gives him a pep talk as he toys with an elastic band around his wrist. When he goes to the location of the shoot, he gets a warm welcome from his co-stars and the crew, which he didn't expect at all. Gregory officially welcomes him back and appreciates Maggie for pulling this off. He also expresses that he expects her to convince him to extend his contract, and she plays along as this can even lead to her promotion at some point. Meanwhile, Darren talks to his co-stars who can't stop talking about how his character got the nicest send-off on the show. Alice approaches the group and sends everyone back to work while briefing Darren about the photoshoot he has in an hour. He heads to the makeup room before accepting an invitation to the party Maggie and Alice are throwing for the wedding anniversary of 2 actors, Lucinda and Walter, from the show. Darren meets up with John and Terry, the styling crew, to get ready for his photoshoot. They introduce her to Trudy, a new cast member who plays a character that grew up much faster than Darren anticipated. Next, he heads to Maggie's office to go over the ideas for his role and realizes how difficult it is due to the condition of the role only lasting for 4 weeks. An actor on the show, Stuart, drops by a ticket from Maggie at the office as his play for a small theater opens tonight. He also invites Darren, who seems a bit awkward when the subject of theater comes up. Once Stuart is gone, Maggie checks in on Darren, but he doesn't want anyone to walk on eggshells around him. He wonders how they messed up their relationship, and she answers that they started taking each other for granted while focusing on their careers. Maggie is about to leave work when Terry invites her for a weekly hike she organizes every Saturday. She encourages Maggie to come as they'll only walk up to the Hollywood sign, and that'll be a good change for Maggie, who keeps sitting and writing for long hours. John is also coming, so Maggie finally agrees. She stops by Alice's office before going home and learns that Darren has always wanted to act as a vampire, and they laugh about it. After confirming their plans to meet at Stuart's show tonight, they say goodbye to each other. Stuart is outside talking secretly to someone on the phone. He's making plans to meet the person, but doesn't want to do it on set because he doesn't want others to know. He quickly hangs up when Maggie walks up to him and lies that he was talking to Zach. He realizes that she wasn't coming to interrogate him and was just heading to her car instead. Maggie and Darren wait for Alice outside the venue for Stuart's play when Alice calls. She tensely breaks the news that the venue for Lucinda and Walter's wedding anniversary party is canceled due to a kitchen fire. Maggie puts the phone on loudspeaker while Alice complains about every other venue being booked. Maggie suggests doing the party at the studio and getting the set designers to decorate, but Darren offers to host the party at his house. Everyone agrees that his backyard looks beautiful at sunset, so that's where the party will be now. It looks like Maggie and Darren will be spending time together both at and after work, working on the script and party preparations. Darren is grabbing coffee at work while talking on the phone with someone about the elastic band he wears around his wrist at all times. Maggie stops by again, and he lies that he was talking to his dog Walker, which is strange because he has acres of fenced property. Maggie admits that she didn't enjoy Stuart's play very much, and Darren teases her by threatening to tell Stuart about it. He laughs at how difficult it is for her to really voice her opinions when Alice gets there. She's divided the tasks for party planning and assigns them to handle the food and drinks for the party. Once Darren goes away, Alice asks Maggie about whether she interrupted something between her and Darren. She also has no difficulty in accepting that Stuart's play was awful, which is why she and Darren slept through it. Zach visits Darren at his house, where he explains to him how Maggie has planned his arrival back on the show. Darren's character will be shown to have amnesia, and it's surprising that even Zach watches the show regularly. He also informs Darren that the network is majorly promoting his return, but Darren worries about whether he can live up to all this pressure. On Saturday, Maggie is bracing herself for the hike when Darren also shows up, and Terry can already guess that he'll leave everyone behind on the trail. Maggie also shares with Terry that she suspects that Darren might have a girlfriend, but is too afraid to tell her. Terry guesses that he doesn't want to throw it in her face, but will eventually break the news. Maggie runs out of energy in the middle of the hike and sits down to catch her breath when Darren and Wiley get there. She learns that they're already on their way down from the trail, and they start talking. He reveals that he didn't stay in New York after his play closed because it wasn't home. Their eyes meet, and Maggie can almost feel as if she is the home he's referring to. He snaps out of it and asks her to join him on the way back as he has to feed Wiley soon. Maggie lets him go by himself because her legs are incapable of moving anymore now. The next day, Maggie finds Darren thanking a woman named Fran for coming over to the set. As Fran drives away, Darren informs Maggie that she's an old friend. but she can sense that he's nervous, and he admits that it's because he'll be in front of a camera after a long time. As he walks behind her on his way to set, he picks at the elastic band on his wrist to cope. When he starts to do his first scene, he completely blanks out and forgets all his lines. Maggie jumps in to rescue him from the embarrassing situation and commands everyone to take a break. She takes him outside to talk, and he accepts that he was scared that this was going to happen all along. He confides in her about how performing in a half-empty theater with the audience walking out on him did quite a number on him. Maggie assures him that no one here is judging him, but rooting for him instead. She reminds him that his fans are still crazy about him, even though it's been 6 years since he played Preston. This shows how great of an actor he is, so she advises him to use all his skills. He likes how she's talking to him straightforwardly this time, and she recommends him taking inspiration from his grandfather, a real-life cop, to play the role. This works as Darren delivers a powerful scene, which also shows how good Maggie is at her job. The next day, Darren apologizes to Maggie for messing up his cue on a scene they shot earlier. She handles him really well, and he can already predict that she'll be a really good producer because she cares about everyone on this show. Maggie insinuates that it's easy to care about people when you love them, and Darren can feel that he's one of those people too. The topic changes when Darren proposes the idea of coming up with a signature cocktail for Walter and Lucinda's party. To celebrate their 40-year-old romance, he is heading to a meeting with a mixologist right now and convinces Maggie to tag along. The mixologist makes a romantic, ruby-themed drink for them to try and assumes that they're a couple in love. She mentions that she wants him to extend his contract, but he's not sure what he wants to do in his career right now. She understands that he doesn't want to abandon his dream of doing theater and assures him that he'll find the right play, just like he found the right girl for himself. The mixologist asks them about the drink, and they decide to name it the Forever Cocktail and serve it at the party. The mixologist suddenly recognizes Darren from his show and texts his ex-wife about it because she's a huge fan. Maggie and Darren have a good laugh about the whole thing, and she accepts that it's fun because she never left the office in the middle of the day before. Darren rushes to go for a fitting, while Maggie spends time with Alice. She requests Maggie to sub in for her at the upcoming soap opera convention because she needs to babysit her grandkids. Being the darling she is, Maggie says yes and discovers that she'll have to attend a panel as well. This freaks her out a bit because she isn't used to answering the public's questions like the cast of the show or Alice, but she has to get used to this if she wants to progress in her career. It's only a bonus that the convention is at a really beautiful resort, so she will have a good time there. In his next lunch meeting with Zach, Darren talks about how his week on set has been. Even though he had his share of setbacks, everyone has been very understanding toward him, especially Maggie. Zach can see that Darren isn't over her, but Darren is confused about where she stands with him. Zach's 2 cents on the whole situation is that Darren should focus on his career for now. Zach also breaks the news that he has found a new play for Darren if he's interested. Ken is the coordinator for the soap opera convention and welcomes Maggie and the cast members of her show at the resort. The cast members decide to have lunch together before their first panel, but Maggie goes her separate way to a cafe because she needs to prepare for it. It is a coincidence that Maggie and Darren's rooms are right next to each other, right across from Walter and Lucinda. She mentions her anxiety about going in front of an audience for the first time, so he gives her some useful tips and an elastic band. He explains that it's a trick to deal with the nerves and reminds the wearer to be present in the moment. Their conversation is interrupted by a call he claims is from Zach, but Maggie overhears a woman's voice on the other side of the call, which makes her curious about whether he's talking to Fran. She starts to eavesdrop, but accidentally makes a commotion and runs inside her room to avoid the embarrassment of being caught red-handed. But she's not as sly as she thinks, and Darren is aware that she was spying on her. At the panel, Ken asks the first question from Maggie, wanting to know how she got started on the network as the head writer. She takes her time in explaining her love for soap operas and how it stems from her fond memories with her mom and grandma. When asked about her plans for writing Preston's character, she manages to keep it a mystery. Someone from the audience asks Darren about his ideal first date, and his response catches Maggie's attention. She gives him a look when another person from the audience confronts Darren about what it's like being back after his play bombed. Maggie chimes in to buy Darren some time, and they handle it together like experts. At the after-party that evening, Maggie notices Darren talking to the producer of their competitor show. He takes her aside to thank her for the save during the panel, and she calls him out for describing their first date during the panel. She is offended that he takes all his dates to the same location where they went together. Darren clarifies that it was his favorite thing, and he never did it with anyone else. They agree that their dates were very special, and wonder how Lucinda and Walter made it work while dating and working together simultaneously. He moves closer to her, and they're about to kiss when their co-star interrupts them because Ken wants everyone for a group photo. The next day, Maggie is determined to make it to the top of a Hollywood sign, so she is reattempting a hike. That's when Darren runs into her while she is panting with her back against a tree. He seems interested in joining her, but she points out that he should probably call someone or check in with them. She's still talking when she hears some growling sounds nearby and immediately hides behind him for cover. She is scared that there might be bears around, which Darren finds extremely amusing. He adds to her fear, so she clutches onto his hand and agrees to keep him by her side for her safety. She finally lets go of his hand when they start talking about the convention, and she says that it's her weekend away from work in 2 years. They talk about their career prospects besides the show, and he realizes that he can do both his show and theater to see what he enjoys more. Later on, the producer of the competing show taunts Maggie about her show being in trouble, and she bites back instead of being nice this time. After the convention, Maggie sits down with Alice and Lucinda, who tease her about rekindling her romance with Darren during the weekend. She denies it by hinting that he's with someone else, but they can't ignore the lovesick look he always gives her. The airing for Darren's first episode starts, but he's not with everyone else due to an appointment he had to go to. He finally shows up when everyone is applauding his return, and Maggie looks affectionately at him. They meet again as they're trying to walk off their nerves before the ratings are up for the new episode. When they're told that it's a hit, Maggie excitedly jumps into his arms, only to retreat awkwardly. Maggie takes a rain check on their walk because Alice is calling a production meeting. Gregory stops by the set when one of Darren's scenes is being shot, and he pushes Darren to stay on the show for longer. After getting a negative response, he pressures Maggie to make Darren stay. Meanwhile, Zach urges Darren to read the new play that he's being offered despite his reluctance. Darren goes to Maggie's office where she's working even on a Saturday, and he insists she take a break. He wants her to check out a restaurant to cater the party and goes through one of her journals in her absence. On their walk, he agrees to stay for a couple more weeks because he owes it to Alice. He takes her to the restaurant they used to go on their date nights. At the party, he gives an elaborate and heartfelt speech which tugs Maggie's heartstrings. The next day, Maggie is on a food run when she observes Darren going into a building. She follows him to catch him with Fran, who turns out to be his teacher for an improv acting class that he's taking. Once she recovers from humiliation, they make a pact to be honest with each other from now on. Darren conveys to Maggie that she needs to share her own vision for the show with Alice and be upfront with her. She apologizes for not doing the same for him. Maggie shoots her shot, and it eventually pays off as Alice retires and she gets to give the show a new life. Darren pursues his acting career both on the show and through plays and lay, and the best part is that they do it all together as a couple.